His hand was on her waist. Too low, too tight. Just another Tuesday in corporate hell, where a paycheck costs a piece of your dignity. Maeve froze, waiting for her boss to move on. But he didn't. Then, the temperature in the room dropped. The man sitting across the glass table didn't shout. He didn't stand. He just tilted his head, eyes dead and black, and said 8 words that shattered her mundane life forever. Touch her again, and you're dead. The fluorescent lights in the Crestview shipping and logistics office buzzed with a low, mechanical hum that sounded exactly like a migraine felt. Maeve stared at the blinking cursor on her dual monitors, her eyes burning. It was 4:13 p.m., the absolute worst part of the day. The coffee was stale. The adrenaline of the morning rush was gone, and there were still 47 minutes left on the clock. 47 minutes of survival. She clicked through a spreadsheet of bill of lading numbers, her posture rigid. She wasn't tense because of the workload. The workload was easy, mindless. She was tense because she could hear the heavy, squeaking tread of Bradley's loafers on the cheap industrial carpet behind her cubicle. Bradley, the director of operations. A man whose title sounded far more impressive than his actual job, which mostly consisted of taking credit for Maeve's organizational systems and smelling like expensive gin masked by cheap peppermint gum. "Looking good, Maeve." His voice was a nasal drawl right by her left ear. She didn't flinch. She had learned over the past 8 months that flinching was like throwing chum in the water. "Just finalizing the manifest for Pier 44, Mr. Cole," she said, keeping her tone flat. Professional. Dead. "I told you, it's just Bradley." He leaned over her shoulder to point at the screen. He didn't need to lean. The text was at 120% zoom. His forearm brushed against her shoulder, the synthetic fabric of his suit jacket rubbing against her cotton blouse. "You're working too hard. We need you fresh for the new clients tomorrow. The Gallagher account." Maeve shifted her chair an inch to the right. Just enough to break contact, not enough to be accused of being hostile. "I've reviewed their requirements. Secure transport, off-hours loading, 0 delay customs clearance." "Exactly." Bradley straightened up, but he let his hand drop. It landed on the back of her chair, his fingers brushing the nape of her neck. A casual, entirely deniable touch. If she reported it to HR, she'd look crazy. He just brushed my chair. That was Bradley's game. Plausible deniability. Death by 1,000 tiny, skin-crawling paper cuts. "Make sure you wear that navy pencil skirt tomorrow," Bradley added, his voice dropping a fraction of an octave. "We want to present a welcoming image." He walked away before she could respond. Maeve let out a slow, shaking breath, rubbing her forehead. She needed this job. Her sister's physical therapy bills weren't going to pay themselves, and the health insurance at Crestview was the only thing keeping them out of bankruptcy. She could endure a greasy boss. Women had been enduring greasy bosses since the invention of the desk. The next morning, the air in the boardroom felt completely different. Maeve stood by the sideboard, organizing a tray of imported mineral water and black coffee. She hadn't worn the navy pencil skirt. She wore black slacks and a high-collared blouse, a silent, petty rebellion. At exactly 9:12 a.m., the glass doors swung open. Bradley bounded forward, his smile practically blinding in its desperation. "Mr. Gallagher, a pleasure, a true pleasure. Welcome to Crestview." Roman Gallagher didn't shake Bradley's hand immediately. He stopped in the doorway, taking up the space not just with his height, but with an absolute, terrifying stillness. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Maeve's car, but he didn't look like a businessman. He looked like a predator forced to wear human clothes. His jaw was dusted with dark scruff. His nose looked like it had been broken and reset perfectly. And his eyes, a cold, striking grey, swept the room in a single, calculating arc. They locked onto Maeve. For a second, the breath punched out of her lungs. It wasn't attraction. It was the primal, lizard-brain realization that she was in the room with something very dangerous. "Cole," Roman said. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that barely carried over the hum of the AC, yet demanded absolute silence. He finally accepted the handshake, squeezing just hard enough to make Bradley's smile strain at the edges. Two men flanked Roman, broad, quiet, carrying themselves with the same loose-limbed readiness. They didn't sit when Roman took the chair at the head of the table. They stood by the door. "We have everything prepared," Bradley babbled, taking his seat. "The routes, the specialized containers, absolute discretion, as requested." Maeve approached with the tray. She set a glass of water and a black coffee in front of Roman. Her hand was steady. She prided herself on that. But as she pulled away, Roman's gaze flicked up to her face. Up close, those grey eyes were exhausting. They missed nothing. They stripped away the polite smile she wore and looked straight at the exhaustion underneath. "Thank you," Roman murmured. Maeve nodded once and retreated to the corner to take minutes. The meeting dragged on. It was a charade, really. Roman Gallagher wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to dictate terms. Crestview was going to move his cargo, unspecified, heavy, and strictly untracked. And Bradley was going to smile and take the massive commission. But Bradley was a man who needed to feel important. And the more Roman sat there, exuding silent, untouchable authority, the more Bradley's fragile ego began to crack. He started interrupting. He started talking louder. And then he started using Maeve as a prop. "Maeve, pull up the 3D schematics of the holding yard." Bradley snapped, snapping his fingers at her like she was a dog. Maeve stood, carrying her tablet to the main projector. She plugged it in, keeping her face perfectly blank. "She's a good girl, Maeve," Bradley said to Roman, chuckling. "A bit slow on the uptake sometimes, but she gets the job done." Maeve's jaw tightened. She tapped the screen, bringing up the layout. Roman didn't look at the screen. He was looking at Bradley. His expression hadn't changed, but the silence in the room had suddenly grown incredibly heavy. The projector cast a harsh, blue-white glow over the polished mahogany table. Maeve stood beside the screen, tapping a stylus against the glass to highlight the loading bays. She was a professional. She ignored the heat creeping up the back of her neck, ignoring the way Bradley's eyes lingered on her waist rather than the multi-million-dollar logistics route she was detailing. "The South Gate provides blind access," Maeve explained, her voice steady. "No security cameras angle toward Bay 4, and the night watchman's rotation leaves a 30-minute window at 2 a.m. It's perfect for off-book transitions." Roman sat back in his chair. He hadn't touched his coffee. He was watching her. Not the way Bradley watched her, like a piece of meat on a hook, but like she was a complex puzzle he was rapidly solving. 30 minutes, Roman repeated, the low gravel of his voice vibrating in the quiet room. "And if a truck blows a tire, if a manifest gets flagged in transit, we build in contingencies?" Maeve answered instantly. She didn't look at Bradley for approval. She spoke directly to the man with the power. "We run a ghost truck 10 minutes ahead. If there's law enforcement or a checkpoint, the ghost truck trips the wire and your cargo reroutes to an auxiliary warehouse." A muscle feathered in Roman's jaw. It was the closest thing to a smile she had seen from him. "You know your business, Miss Jenkins," Maeve said. "She knows what I teach her," Bradley interjected, his voice too loud, too sharp. He stood up from his chair, clearly agitated that the alpha male in the room was giving the secretary the floor. Bradley walked over to where Maeve stood by the screen. He invaded her personal space instantly. The smell of peppermint and stale gin hit her nose. "We run a tight ship here, Gallagher," Bradley said, turning to face Roman, but keeping himself pressed close to Maeve's side. "I personally oversee all these contingency plans." That was a lie. Bradley hadn't even read the contingency file. Maeve had drafted it at 3 a.m. on a Sunday. "Bring up the auxiliary warehouse layout," Bradley demanded, not looking at her. Maeve went to reach for the tablet on the stand, but Bradley moved at the same time. Instead of just pointing, he stepped into her, forcing her to shift her weight off balance. As she stumbled slightly, Bradley's hand shot out. He didn't grab her arm to steady her. He dropped his heavy, clammy palm directly onto her hip. And he squeezed. It wasn't a brush. It wasn't an accident. It was a firm, possessive grip, his thumb pressing hard into the soft flesh above her hip bone, right through the fabric of her trousers. He pulled her flush against his side, pinning her there under the guise of looking at the screen together. Maeve froze. Her lungs stopped working. The fight-or-flight response kicked in, but years of corporate conditioning, of poverty, of needing this paycheck, slammed down on the fight instinct. If she shoved him away, she was the crazy one. She was the one making a scene in front of the firm's biggest client. She'd be fired by noon. So, she went completely still, her eyes fixed blindly on the glowing blue screen, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She tried to subtly step away, but Bradley's grip tightened, a punishing pressure that said, "Stay put." Across the table, Roman Gallagher stopped breathing. The shift in the room wasn't gradual. It was instantaneous. The air pressure literally seemed to drop. The two massive guards by the door, who had been perfectly relaxed a second ago, suddenly straightened, their hands dropping to their sides. Roman didn't jump out of his chair. He didn't yell. The terrifying thing was how little he moved. He slowly leaned forward, planting his elbows on the glass table. The knuckles of his right hand were white. His grey eyes, previously calculating, were now pools of absolute, frozen violence. He wasn't looking at the screen. He wasn't looking at Maeve. He was staring directly at Bradley's hand, resting on Maeve's hip. "Cole," Roman said softly. The softness of his tone was worse than a scream. It was the sound of a blade sliding out of a leather sheath. Bradley, utterly oblivious in his arrogance, didn't notice the atmosphere. He kept his hand firmly on Maeve, chuckling. "Yes, as you can see, the auxiliary route is—" "Take your hand off her." Roman didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The words dropped onto the glass table like lead weights. Bradley stopped talking. He blinked, confusion warring with his bloated pride. He looked down at his own hand on Maeve's hip, as if he had just realized it was there. But he didn't move it. He was too stupid, too used to ruling his little kingdom, to recognize the apex predator sitting 3 feet away. "Excuse me?" Bradley scoffed, putting on a bewildered, defensive smile. We're just looking at the schematics. Maeve and I work very closely." He squeezed her hip again, a defiant little twitch of his fingers, trying to assert dominance. A sharp, metallic click echoed near the door. Maeve didn't look, but she knew the sound of a safety being disengaged. Roman finally stood. He didn't rush. He rose with the smooth, lethal grace of a landslide about to break. He buttoned the center button of his charcoal suit jacket. The silence in the room was absolute. Maeve was still trapped against Bradley, but the older man's grip was beginning to slacken. The reality of the situation was finally piercing through the peppermint gum and gin. Roman walked around the edge of the long conference table. His heavy boots made no sound on the carpet. He stopped exactly 2 feet in front of Bradley. Up close, the size difference was comical. Bradley was average height, softening around the middle. Roman was a wall of muscle and suppressed rage. "I'm going to explain this to you once," Roman said, his voice dropping to a whisper that scraped against the walls. "Because you seem like a man who struggles with basic concepts." Bradley swallowed hard. His hand fell away from Maeve's hip as if she had suddenly caught fire. He took a half step back, his face draining of color. "Mr. Gallagher, I think there's a misunderstanding." Roman didn't look at Maeve. His dead black gaze remained fixed on Bradley's sweating face. He tilted his head slightly, a shark examining a wounded seal. "Touch her again," Roman warned, the words devoid of theatricality, devoid of anything except cold, hard fact, and you're dead. The silence that followed was suffocating. Maeve stood frozen, her side suddenly cold where Bradley's heavy hand had been. Her mind was spinning, trying to process the whiplash. Men like Roman Gallagher didn't defend secretaries. They bought them, ignored them, or used them. They didn't threaten to murder mid-level executives over a wandering hand. Bradley's mouth opened and closed like a dying fish. A thin sheen of sweat broke out across his forehead, gleaming under the harsh blue light of the projector. I... Bradley stuttered. The blustering authority completely evaporated. He looked at the two men standing by the door, then back at Roman. Are you threatening me, Gallagher? Because I'm the director here. You can't just walk into my office and... Roman moved so fast, Maeve didn't even see the wind-up. His hand shot out, grabbing Bradley by the throat. He didn't squeeze to choke him. He just gripped the man's windpipe with enough force to halt his words entirely, shoving him backward until Bradley's spine slammed into the whiteboard behind the screen. The impact rattled the metal frame. Maeve gasped, stepping back, her hands flying to her mouth. Roman held Bradley pinned to the board. Bradley's hands fluttered up, grabbing uselessly at Roman's iron wrist. His eyes bulged, terrified tears springing to the corners. It wasn't a threat, Cole, Roman said, his voice still that terrifying, even whisper. He leaned in until his nose was an inch from Bradley's. It was a guarantee. Your hand belongs to me now. If it ever lands on her again, I will cut it off at the wrist, and I will make you eat it. Do you understand? Bradley couldn't speak. He managed a frantic, jerky nod. Roman held him there for 3 more seconds, letting the terror fully marinate in the man's veins. Then he let go. Bradley collapsed against the whiteboard, sliding down a few inches, gasping for air and clutching his throat. He looked pathetic, a crumpled, ruined little man. Roman didn't spare him a second glance. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a stark, white linen handkerchief, and slowly wiped the hand he had used to grab Bradley. He dropped the handkerchief onto Bradley's chest. Then Roman turned to Maeve. Her breath hitched. She backed up a step, her heel catching on the carpet. The man who had just manhandled her boss like a rag doll was now looking at her. But the frozen violence in his eyes was gone. Instead, there was a overwhelming possessiveness that terrified her in a completely different way. Get your things, Roman said. Maeve blinked. What? Your purse, your coat, whatever you need, Roman instructed, his tone brooking absolutely no argument. You don't work here anymore. Panic spiked through Maeve's chest. The shock of the violence receded, replaced by the crushing reality of her life. I can't just leave. I need this job. My sister's medical bills. I'll handle the bills. Roman cut her off, stepping closer. The scent of him, sandalwood, dark tobacco, and expensive wool, washed over her. It was intoxicating and dangerous. And you don't need this job. You work for me now. I don't even know what you do! Maeve shot back, her cynical nature finally breaking through the fear. She wasn't a damsel in distress. She was a woman calculating her survival. You're a criminal. You think I want to trade a sleazy boss for a mobster? The guards at the door tensed. Nobody spoke to Roman Gallagher like that. But Roman just stared at her, the ghost of a smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. He liked that she pushed back. He liked the fire in her eyes. You don't have a choice, Maeve, he said softly, using her first name for the first time. It sent a shiver straight down her spine. A man like that? He gestured vaguely to Bradley, who was currently crawling toward the door on his hands and knees, trying to escape. He doesn't stop. He just waits until nobody is looking, and I can't be here 24 hours a day to watch him. He reached out. Maeve braced herself, expecting a rough grip. Instead, his large, calloused hand gently touched her elbow. The contrast between the violence he had just committed and the soft, careful way he touched her made her breath catch in her throat. I protect what's mine, Roman said, his grey eyes locking onto hers, leaving no room for misunderstanding. He wasn't offering her a job. He was claiming her. "I'm not yours," she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. Roman leaned down, his lips brushing against her ear, sending a jolt of electricity through her entire body. "You are," he murmured into her hair. "You just haven't realized it yet. Now, get your coat." The elevator ride down to the lobby took exactly 42 seconds. Maeve counted them. It was a grounding technique she'd learned in a free online therapy module, right between deep breathing and accepting the things you cannot change. Right now, she couldn't change the fact that she was flanked by two men who looked like they benched small cars for fun, while Roman Gallagher stood beside her, staring at the changing numbers above the door. She didn't have her coat. She didn't have her purse. She had her phone jammed into her slacks pocket and a rapidly disintegrating sense of reality. "I left my keys on my desk," Maeve said. Her voice sounded thin, trapped in the polished steel box. Roman didn't look away from the floor indicator. "You won't need them." "I need them to get into my apartment. I need them to start my car." She turned to face his profile. It was a harsh profile, a cliff face of bone and muscle. "Look, Mr. Gallagher, I appreciate you stopping Bradley, truly, but this is kidnapping. Kidnapping implies I'm holding you for ransom." He finally looked at her. The grey eyes were calm, infuriatingly calm. "I'm offering you a severance package and a relocation. Liam." The larger of the two guards, Liam, reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder. He held it out to her. Maeve stared at it like it was a live grenade. She didn't move her hands. "What is that?" "Read it," Roman said. The elevator pinged. The doors slid open to the underground parking garage. The scent of motor oil and damp concrete rushed in. Roman stepped out, expecting her to follow. When she hesitated, he stopped, turning back. He didn't order her. He just waited. The gravity of his presence pulled at her, stronger than the inertia keeping her in the elevator. She stepped out, grabbing the folder from Liam's hand as she passed. A matte black SUV sat idling near the exit, a third man behind the wheel. It wasn't flashy. There were no tinted windows thick enough to look suspicious, no oversized rims. It was designed to disappear in traffic, heavy and armored. Roman opened the rear door himself. He didn't gesture for her to get in. He just held it. Maeve stood on the concrete, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. She flipped open the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printout from Memorial Hospital's billing department. It was her sister's account. "Patient, Sarah Jenkins. Diagnosis, severe spinal trauma. Balance due, $142,250. Maeve's eyes dropped to the bottom right corner. There was a red stamp. "Sir, paid in full. Balance, 0.0. The air punched out of her lungs. Her knees locked. She stared at the zeros until they blurred, the harsh lines of the numbers swimming in a sudden, sharp well of tears. She had spent the last 2 years drowning in those numbers. She had negotiated, begged, skipped meals, and endured Bradley's creeping hands, all for those numbers. And Roman Gallagher had wiped them out before he even walked into the boardroom. She looked up. Roman was watching her. He didn't look smug. He didn't look expectant. "How?" she whispered. "Why?" "Crestview was a test run," Roman said, his voice flat, echoing slightly in the empty garage. "I investigate the companies I use to move my freight. I investigate the executives, and I investigate the people actually doing the work." He stepped closer. The proximity was a physical weight. "Bradley Cole is an idiot. But you rebuilt their entire logistics network while working 12-hour shifts on a receptionist's salary to pay off a debt that wasn't yours. She's my sister. And now she's safe." Roman gestured to the open door. "Get in the car, Maeve. The life you had 20 minutes ago is over. You don't have to fight for scraps anymore." It was a trap. She knew it was a trap. Men like Roman didn't give away $140,000 out of the goodness of their hearts. They bought leverage. They bought loyalty. They bought people. But as she looked at the red stamp on that paper, The cynical, exhausted part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive for so long, made a ruthless calculation. She had already been bought by Crestview. She had already sold her soul for a health insurance premium. At least this devil paid up front. Maeve clutched the folder to her chest, ducked her head, and climbed into the back of the SUV. Roman slid in beside her, the door shut with a heavy, vacuum-sealed thud, cutting off the sound of the world outside. "Drive," Roman said. The penthouse was exactly what she expected, yet entirely different. Located on the top floor of a brutalist high-rise overlooking the river, it wasn't dripping with gold or tacky mobster opulence. It looked like a museum curated by a man who didn't understand comfort. The floors were poured concrete, polished to a dull shine. The furniture was low, sharp-angled, and constructed of dark leather and steel. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a sprawling grid of glittering lights and crawling traffic. It was beautiful, and it was freezing. "Your room is down the hall, last door on the left," Roman said. He was shrugging off his charcoal suit jacket, draping it over the back of a sofa. He unbuttoned his cuffs, rolling up the pristine white sleeves to reveal forearms corded with muscle and laced with faded, jagged scars. Maeve stood in the entryway, her arms crossed tight over her chest. "Am I allowed to leave?" Roman walked to a massive black marble kitchen island. He poured a glass of water from a pitcher and drank it before answering. "You are not a prisoner, Maeve, but for the next 72 hours, you stay here." "Why?" "Because Bradley Cole is going to realize he lost his best worker and his pride in the same hour. Men like him don't retaliate directly against me. They go for soft targets. You." Roman set the glass down. "Until I ensure he understands the permanence of our conversation, you are safer here." Maeve laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "Safer, with the head of a criminal syndicate." Roman leaned against the marble counter, crossing his ankles. "A criminal syndicate implies a lack of structure. I run an import-export business. Sometimes the government disagrees with my import manifests. Semantics. You threatened to feed a man his own hand, and yet he still has his hand, because he listened." Roman's gaze locked onto hers. The intensity in the room spiked. "I don't hurt people who listen. I need to call Sarah. There's a phone on the nightstand in your room. It's secure. Call her. Tell her you got a promotion. An overseas logistics coordinator. It explains your absence, and it explains the hospital bill." He had thought of everything. The sheer, suffocating competence of it made her want to scream. She turned on her heel and marched down the hallway. The bedroom was massive. The bed alone looked like it cost more than her college education. She found the phone, dialed the rehab facility's number, and waited. When Sarah answered, her voice was brighter than it had been in months. "May, did you see? Did you check the portal?" Sarah was practically breathless. "An anonymous donor. The administrator said it was a foundation grant. The whole balance, May. The whole thing." Maeve closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against the cool glass of the bedroom window. The city sprawled out below her, oblivious to the deal she had just made. "I saw, sir," Maeve managed, forcing a smile into her voice. It's incredible. You don't have to work the weekends anymore," Sarah said, the relief palpable, heavy enough to break through the phone line. "You can actually sleep." "Yeah, I got a promotion, actually. Just today." Maeve recited the lie Roman had fed her. It tasted like ash on her tongue, but hearing her sister's unburdened laughter made it swallowable. After she hung up, Maeve sat on the edge of the bed. The silence of the apartment was absolute. No sirens, no rattling pipes, no heavy footsteps from the upstairs neighbors. Just the hum of climate control. For 2 days, that silence was her entire world. She quickly realized Roman wasn't playing a game of intimidation. He was playing a game of total control. He left early in the mornings and returned late. When he was home, they barely spoke. But his presence was a physical entity in the room. He didn't make passes at her. He didn't hover, but he noticed everything. On the first morning, she had made coffee using the complex espresso machine, but couldn't find sugar. The next morning, a ceramic bowl of raw sugar cubes sat next to the machine. She spent an afternoon reading a book she found on the shelf, leaving it face down on the armrest. The next day, a silver bookmark was placed perfectly within its pages. It wasn't romance, it was observation. It was Roman proving silently that he saw her, that she was his focus. It drove her absolutely insane. By the evening of the third day, the gilded cage felt like it was shrinking. Maeve paced the length of the living room, barefoot, wearing a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt she'd found in the guest closet. The front door clicked open. Roman stepped inside, accompanied by Liam. Roman looked exhausted. There was a smudge of something dark, oil or blood, she couldn't tell, on the cuff of his shirt. Liam gave Roman a curt nod and exited, pulling the heavy door shut. Roman sighed, rolling his shoulders. He looked up and saw her standing by the window. 72 hours are up. Maeve said. She didn't raise her voice, but it cut through the quiet room like a scalpel. Bradley hasn't come for me. I want to leave. Roman walked to the kitchen island, dropping his keys into a leather tray. Bradley Cole was fired this morning. Embezzlement. Crestview is under audit. Maeve blinked. You ruined him. He ruined himself. I just handed the IRS his ledgers. Roman poured a dark, amber liquid into the tumbler. You're free to go, Maeve. She froze. The words didn't compute. I can leave. The door is unlocked. He took a sip of his drink, his grey eyes watching her over the rim of the glass. Maeve looked at the heavy oak door. She thought about her apartment, the drafty windows, the stack of past-due utility bills on the counter, the knowledge that she had no job, no reference from Crestview, and an employment gap. The hospital bill was paid, yes, but survival was a daily subscription. She looked back at Roman. He was perfectly still. He knew she wouldn't leave. He had engineered a situation where staying was the only logical choice. You're a bastard, she said softly. Roman lowered the glass. A muscle in his jaw flexed. I never claimed to be anything else, but I'm a bastard who recognizes talent. You're wasted in a cubicle. You see patterns. You build contingencies. You're fearless enough to stand in a room with me and call me a criminal to my face. And what do you want me to do with that? Work for me. Doing what? Running drugs? Moving guns? I don't deal in narcotics or weapons, Roman said, his voice sharpening with a sudden rigid morality that surprised her. I move information. I move assets for people who need discretion. High-value art, corporate prototypes, people who need to disappear. It requires absolute logistical perfection, something my current team lacks. Maeve crossed her arms, digging her fingernails into her biceps. And if I refuse? Then you walk out that door. The debt is clear. You owe me nothing. It was the illusion of choice. But it was a damn good illusion. Maeve let out a slow, shaking breath. The cynical survivor in her took the wheel. I want $50,000 a year, she said, plus full medical for Sarah, and I don't touch anything violent. Roman set the glass down. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. You'll start at 120. The medical is already covered, and the only violence you'll see is what happens to people who try to stop our shipments. He walked toward her. Maeve held her ground, refusing to step back. He stopped 2 feet away. The smell of sandalwood, dark tobacco, and rain clung to him. Tomorrow, Roman said softly, I show you the real map. The real map wasn't a metaphor. It was a massive, digital tabletop screen in the center of Roman's private office, hidden behind a false wall in his downtown warehouse. The room smelled of ozone, burnt coffee, and old paper. Maeve stared down at the glowing grid. It was a live feed of global shipping lanes, trucking routes, and private aviation corridors. Red dots pulsed slowly across the oceans. Green lines snaked through continental highways. This is the network, Roman said, standing beside her. They were shoulder to shoulder, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his arm. Every dot is a shipment. Every line is a route we control or lease. Maeve leaned over the table, her eyes darting across the data. Her brain, starved for complex stimulation over the last 3 days, immediately latched onto the patterns. You're running overlapping dummy routes, she murmured, tracing a finger over a cluster of green lines passing through the Midwest. You've got 3 trucks running the same highway, but only one is carrying the actual payload. The other 2 are heat sinks, decoys. Roman turned his head to look at her. Yes, it's inefficient, Maeve said bluntly, straightening up. She met his gaze, entirely in her element now. The fear was gone, replaced by the sheer arrogance of knowing she was right. You're paying triple for gas, triple for driver salaries, and creating a larger footprint. Law enforcement looks for anomalies. 3 identical trucks running a dead route is an anomaly. Wyatt, a lean, scarred man who served as Roman's head of transport, scoffed from the corner of the room. We've run it that way for 5 years, sweetheart. Never lost a load. Maeve didn't look at Wyatt. She kept her eyes on Roman. You haven't lost a load because you've been lucky. If you stagger the departures by 12 hours and route the decoys through commercial way stations while the payload takes the county roads, you break the visual link. You save fuel and you blend into the noise of regular freight. Silence descended on the office. Wyatt opened his mouth to argue, but Roman raised a single hand. Run the simulation, Roman ordered. Maeve bypassed the tablet Roman handed her and leaned directly over the main console. Her fingers flew across the glass interface, isolating the Midwest corridor. She adjusted the departure times, dragged the waypoints to county routes, and initiated the predictive modeling software built into the table. 30 seconds later, the screen flashed green. Efficiency increase, 34%. Detection probability decreased by 62%. Wyatt stared at the screen, muttering a quiet curse. Roman didn't look at the screen. He was looking at Maeve's hands, the quick, sure way she moved. Implement it, Roman said to Wyatt, and leave us. Wyatt nodded, looking at Maeve with a sudden, grudging respect before exiting the office and locking the heavy steel door behind him. The click of the lock seemed deafening. Maeve stepped back from the table. The adrenaline of the problem-solving faded, leaving her acutely aware that she was alone in a soundproof room with a crime boss. You're staring again, she said, keeping her tone light, defensive. Roman moved around the edge of the digital table. His movements were always deliberate. Never rushed, never wasted. He walked until he was standing directly in front of her, forcing her to back up until her thighs hit the edge of a mahogany desk. I'm observing my new investment, Roman said softly. I'm an employee, not an investment. You're both. He placed his hands on the desk, bracketing her hips, trapping her there without actually touching her. It was a purely psychological cage. Maeve's breath hitched. She looked up at him, her chin tilted defiantly. Why are you doing this? The money, the job, the hovering. You don't know me. I know exactly who you are. His voice dropped an octave, scraping against the quiet of the room. I saw you in that boardroom. Bradley Cole had his hands on you and you didn't flinch. You didn't cry. You just froze, calculating the exact cost of pushing him away. Maeve looked away, shame burning the back of her neck. I needed the job. I know. Roman's right hand moved. He didn't grab her. He reached up, his knuckles brushing lightly against her cheek. The touch was agonizingly gentle, entirely at odds with the violence she knew his hands were capable of. I know what it looks like when someone is surviving instead of living. I recognized it the second I walked into that room. Maeve forced herself to meet his eyes. Because you're a survivor? She asked, her cynicism lacing the word. Because I spent the first 20 years of my life being stepped on by men like Bradley Cole, men who take because they think no one will stop them. Roman's jaw tightened, the memory of old, ugly things darkening his grey eyes. I swore I would never let another person put their hands on me, or anything that was mine ever again. I am not yours. Maeve repeated the words she had spoken in the boardroom. But this time, they lacked conviction. They sounded like a plea. "Aren't you?" Roman leaned in. The heat of him was overwhelming. "You fixed my logistics network in 10 minutes. You paid off your sister's debts. You're standing in the center of my world, Maeve. You fit perfectly. This isn't a fairy tale, Roman. This is a crime ring. I'm helping you break the law." "The law didn't help your sister," he fired back, his voice thick with absolute conviction. "The law let Bradley Cole assault you in broad daylight. The law is a set of rules written by rich men to keep poor people exhausted. I don't care about the law. I care about order. My order." He stepped closer, his chest brushing against hers. The physical contact sent a jolt of pure, terrifying electricity straight down her spine. "I won't be a kept woman," she whispered, her hands gripping the edge of the mahogany desk to keep from trembling. "I don't want a kept woman," Roman murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips. "I want a partner. I want the brain that just outsmarted my head of transport. But understand this," he leaned down, his lips brushing against the shell of her ear, his breath hot against her skin. "The protection you're under is absolute. You are part of this now. No one will ever disrespect you. No one will ever touch you without your permission. If they try, they won't live to regret it." Maeve closed her eyes. It was toxic. It was a dangerous, twisted dynamic built on trauma and control. But as his hand slid to the nape of her neck, a heavy, warm anchor in the storm of her life, she realized the terrifying truth. She didn't want him to let go. 3 months blur into a single, high-octane frequency. Maeve didn't just learn the network. She fundamentally rewired it. The digital tabletop in the hidden warehouse became an extension of her own nervous system. She stripped away Wyatt's outdated brute force logistics and replaced them with elegant, invisible algorithms. She routed high-value assets through blind spots in federal surveillance, layered dummy corporations over leasing agreements, and shaved millions off operational costs. She stopped sleeping in the guest room. Her clothes migrated to Roman's closet. Her toothbrush sat beside his. They hadn't slept together. The tension between them was a physical, vibrating wire drawn so tight it hummed. But Roman never pushed. He was waiting for her to step over the line. Then, on a suffocatingly humid Tuesday in August, the wire snapped. Maeve was alone at the console. Wyatt was out supervising a loading dock in Jersey. Roman was in a meeting across town with a state senator who had a gambling problem and a very useful seat on the transportation committee. At 2:14 p.m., the digital map flared. A sharp, pulsing crimson warning slashed across the lower right quadrant of the screen. An anomaly. It was a high-priority convoy, 3 armored transport vehicles moving a massive shipment of untraceable bearer bonds up the I-95 corridor. Maeve slammed her coffee cup down, coffee spilling over the rim, and tapped the flashing icon. The telemetry data flooded the screen. Vehicle 1, speed dropped from 65 to 0. Vehicle 2, offline, GPS signal terminated. Vehicle 3, deviating from the route. Rapid acceleration. Her heart kicked against her ribs. This wasn't law enforcement. The FBI or state troopers ran coordinated rolling roadblocks. They boxed you in. They didn't knock out GPS signals and force hard stops on federal highways. This was a hit, a hijacking. Maeve's fingers flew across the glass interface, pulling up the local DOT traffic cameras. She patched into the nearest feed. The grainy video showed a bottleneck under an overpass. 2 black SUVs had corralled the lead transport. Armed men in tactical gear were already swarming the cab. "Liam!" she barked, her voice echoing in the empty command center. The heavy steel door swung open. Liam stepped in, his hand instinctively dropping to the holster at his hip. "Yeah? We have a breach on the I-95 corridor, mile marker 1 to 12. The O'Connor shipment is being taken." Maeve didn't panic. The cold, cynical part of her brain, the part that had survived poverty, the part that had survived Bradley Cole, slammed a steel door over her fear. Liam swore, a harsh, guttural sound. He pulled a radio from his belt. "I'll call the boss." "No!" Maeve snapped. "Roman is 20 minutes away. By the time he mobilizes a strike team, the bonds are gone and our drivers are dead. Call Wyatt. Tell him to prep the cleanup crew. I'm handling this." Liam stared at her. For a second, she saw the hesitation. She was just the logistics girl, the secretary who got promoted because the boss liked her. Maeve stood up straight. She channeled every ounce of Roman's terrifying, absolute authority. "Do it, Liam. Now." Liam nodded once, stepping back and raising the radio to his mouth. Maeve turned back to the screen. The hijackers were trying to breach the rear doors of the lead transport, but the third vehicle, driven by a kid named Miller, was trying to break the perimeter. She tapped the comms icon, linking directly to the cab of the third transport. "Miller, this is Maeve," she said, her voice dropping into a flat, calm register. "Do not engage. Do not try to ram them. You are outgunned." Static hissed over the speaker, followed by Miller's panicked voice. "They blew the tires on Rig 2. They've got thermite on the back of Rig 1. I have to push through." "If you push, they will shoot you through the engine block, and you will die," Maeve said. "Listen to me. Put the truck in reverse. Back up 300 yards. There is a maintenance exit on your right. Take it." "It's a dead end. It goes into an unfinished industrial park." "I know," Maeve said. "Take it." She muted the mic. Her eyes darted across the secondary map, layered beneath the GPS interface. It was a grid of city infrastructure, water lines, power grids, and traffic control systems. Roman didn't just buy politicians, he bought access. She watched the third truck reverse on the camera feed. As soon as it hit the dirt road of the maintenance exit, two of the hijackers' black SUVs broke off from the main group and tore after it in pursuit. They were greedy. They wanted the whole payload. "Come on," Maeve whispered, watching the blips move into the grey zone of the unfinished industrial park. The park was essentially a concrete bowl surrounded by high, chain-link fences. One way in, one way out. She waited until Miller's truck hit the far wall of the yard. She waited until the two pursuing SUVs crossed the threshold of the narrow entrance gate. Then her fingers moved in a blur. She accessed the municipal grid. She found the automated security protocol for the industrial park's main gate, a heavy reinforced steel barricade designed to lock down the yard at night. She bypassed the timer. She fired the command. On the screen, a secondary traffic camera caught the action. The massive steel gate slammed shut directly behind the two SUVs, locking them inside the concrete bowl with Miller's armored truck. "Miller," Maeve said into the mic. "Lock down the cab. The armor will hold against small arms fire. You just turned that truck into a bunker. They are trapped in a cage with you, and they have no way out." Silence on the line, then a shaky breath. "Copy that, Maeve. I'm locked in." Maeve didn't stop. She looked back at the main highway. The rest of the hijackers had finally burned through the back of Rig 1, but the delay had cost them. She pulled up the local police dispatch frequencies. She didn't call 911, that left a record. Instead, she tripped the automated silent alarms of 3 nearby commercial banks simultaneously, spoofing the GPS data to redirect the dispatch to mile marker 112. Within 2 minutes, the sound of sirens wailed through the traffic camera's audio feed. The hijackers froze. They looked at the flashing red and blue lights approaching in the distance. They didn't have time to load the bonds. They abandoned the transport, scrambling into their remaining vehicles and tearing off the shoulder, fleeing into the tree line just as the first state trooper rolled up. Maeve leaned back in her chair. Her hands were shaking violently. She shoved them under her thighs, pressing hard to stop the tremors. The heavy door banged open. Roman strode into the room. His suit jacket was gone. His tie was ripped loose. His eyes were wide, sweeping the room before locking onto her. Liam was right behind him. "Status!" Roman demanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Maeve swallowed hard. Her throat felt like sandpaper. "Rig 1 was breached, but the payload is intact. Law enforcement scared them off. Rig 2 is disabled, driver is safe. Rig 3 is secured in the Waverley Industrial Park along with 2 hostile vehicles. The hostiles are trapped behind a reinforced gate. Miller is unharmed inside the cab. Roman stopped at the edge of the console. He looked at the map. He looked at the police trackers converging on the highway. He looked at the lockdown icon over the industrial park. Then he looked at Maeve. The terrifying violence that usually simmered just beneath his skin was completely gone, replaced by a profound, earth-shattering awe. "You lock them in," Roman whispered. "They wanted the truck," Maeve said, her voice finally steadying. She pulled her hands out from under her legs and met his gaze. "I gave it to them." Roman turned to Liam. "Take a strike team to the Waverley Park. The police don't know about that location yet. Extract Miller. As for the men in the SUVs..." His grey eyes went flat and dead. "Remind them what happens when they touch my property." Liam nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. "With pleasure." As Liam left, Roman walked around the console. He didn't stop until he was standing over her. He reached down, gripping the armrests of her chair, boxing her in. He leaned close. "You are?" Roman breathed, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. "The most terrifying thing I have ever seen." Maeve looked up into his eyes. The cynical armor melted away. "I was protecting what's mine." It was 4:13 a.m. when the front door of the penthouse finally opened. Maeve was sitting on the edge of the leather sofa in the dark. She hadn't turned on the lights. The glow of the city filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows cast long, skeletal shadows across the poured concrete floor. Roman walked in. He moved slowly. The heavy, lethal grace was gone, replaced by a stiff, painful limp. He didn't turn on the lights either. He dropped his keys on the marble counter. The sound was deafening in the silence. Maeve stood up. She wore one of his old t-shirts and soft sweatpants. She padded across the cold floor until she reached the kitchen island. Roman was leaning heavily against the counter, his head bowed. The white dress shirt he wore was ruined. The sleeves were torn, and the left side, just below the ribs, was soaked in a dark, rust-colored stain. It wasn't oil this time. The heavy metallic scent of copper hung in the air. "You're bleeding on my floor," Maeve said quietly. Roman let out a harsh, rasping chuckle. "It's my floor. I live here. That makes it mine." She stepped around the counter. Up close, the damage was worse. His knuckles were split open, raw and bruised purple. A deep cut traced the line of his jaw, blood already congealing in his dark scruff. He didn't look like a kingpin. He looked like a man who had spent the last 8 hours tearing someone apart with his bare hands to send a message. Maeve didn't flinch. She had spent her whole life shrinking away from the ugly parts of the world. But standing here, looking at the monster she had chosen, she didn't feel fear. She felt a fierce, aching possession. "Sit down," she ordered. Roman didn't argue. He moved to the stool and slumped onto it. Maeve walked to the master bathroom and returned with the trauma kit Liam kept stocked under the sink. She stood between his spread knees. She unbuttoned his ruined shirt. Her fingers were deft, efficient. She pulled the fabric back, revealing a jagged, ugly slice across his ribs. It wasn't deep enough to require a hospital, but it was ugly. "Kavanagh's men?" she asked, soaking a gauze pad in antiseptic. "Yeah," Roman grunted, closing his eyes as she pressed the cold, burning alcohol into the wound. His jaw locked, but he didn't pull away. "They thought we were weak, because I've been quiet lately, consolidating." "Are they still thinking that?" "They aren't thinking much of anything anymore." Roman opened his eyes. They were exhausted, shadowed with the weight of the violence he carried so she wouldn't have to. Maeve taped a heavy dressing over his ribs. She moved to his face, taking a fresh wipe to clean the blood from his jawline. She was so close she could feel the heat radiating off his skin. "You could have died tonight," Maeve said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. "It's the cost of doing business," Roman murmured, his gaze tracking her every movement. "I don't like the cost. Roman reached up, his large, calloused hand wrapped around her wrist, stopping her from pulling away. He didn't squeeze hard. He just anchored her there. "When you locked that gate today," Roman said, his voice dropping into a ragged whisper. When I saw you standing at the center of my network, tearing them apart to protect our people, I realized something." Maeve's breath hitched. "What?" "I built all of this." He gestured vaguely to the apartment, the city below, the invisible empire. "So I could be untouchable. So no one could ever have leverage over me again. No weaknesses." He tugged her wrist gently, forcing her to step closer until her thighs brushed against his knees. "And then you walked into that boardroom and you broke every rule I had. You are the ultimate liability, Maeve, because if anyone ever touches you, I will burn this entire city to the ground. I won't care about the network. I won't care about the money. I will just watch it burn." It wasn't a romance novel confession. There were no flowers. There were no promises of a happily ever after. It was a bleak, terrifying admission of absolute vulnerability from a man who dealt in death. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. Maeve dropped the antiseptic wipe onto the counter. She didn't hesitate. She didn't calculate the risk. For the first time in her life, she just jumped. She cupped his face in her hands, her thumbs tracing the rough line of his jaw, and kissed him. Roman groaned, a sound torn straight from his chest, his arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against him. There was nothing gentle about it. It was a collision. It was the desperate, messy clash of two people who had spent their entire lives surviving, finally finding a place where they could just exist. His mouth was hot, tasting of copper and adrenaline. His hands were heavy and possessive, anchoring her against the pain in his ribs. Maeve threaded her fingers into his dark hair, pulling him closer, matching his desperate energy with a fierce hunger of her own. They didn't make it to the bedroom. They didn't need to. In the shadows of the cold, concrete penthouse, surrounded by the remnants of a violent night, they tore away the last remaining walls between them. It wasn't a surrender. It was a hostile takeover, mutually agreed upon. 18 months later, the boardroom was a completely different animal. It wasn't the cheap mahogany and stale fluorescent lights of Crestview Logistics. It was a sweeping oval of smoked glass set inside a high-rise in the financial district. A legitimate front for an illegitimate empire. Maeve sat at the head of the table. She wore a charcoal suit, tailored sharply, ruthless in its cut. Her hair was pulled back. Her posture was flawless. She wasn't holding a tablet, and she certainly wasn't fetching coffee. Across the table sat a man named Harrison. He was a regional director for Customs and Border Protection. He was sweating. "The tariff increases are unavoidable." Harrison lied smoothly, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. "New federal mandates. Every shipping company is taking the hit. If you want your priority freight cleared without delay, there is an administrative fee. 20%. It was a shakedown. A clumsy, arrogant shakedown. Maeve looked at Harrison. She didn't speak immediately. She let the silence stretch, watching the way Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Roman sat 2 seats down from her. He was leaning back, his arms crossed over his chest, his face an unreadable mask. He wasn't leading the meeting. He was watching her lead it. 20%. Maeve finally said. Her voice was cool, level, the voice of someone holding all the cards. "That's a steep administrative fee, Director Harrison. It's the cost of doing business in this climate, Miss Jenkins." Harrison smiled. It was a patronizing, greasy smile, the kind of smile Bradley Cole used to wear. Maeve didn't flinch. She felt a brief, distant echo of the terrified girl she used to be. And then she crushed it without a second thought. She tapped the surface of the smart table in front of her. A holographic projection sprang to life in the center of the glass oval. It was a bank ledger. "This is an offshore account in the Caymans," Maeve stated, reading the numbers aloud. "Registered to a shell corporation called Horizon Ventures, a corporation whose sole beneficiary is your brother-in-law. Oddly enough, the exact amount of your administrative fees over the last 3 years matches the deposits in this account perfectly. Harrison stopped sweating. He went completely pale. The handkerchief fell from his hand. "Where did you get that?" "I'm a logistics expert," Maeve said, leaning forward slightly, her eyes locking onto his with terrifying intensity. "I track assets, whether it's a shipping container in the Atlantic or a wire transfer in the Caribbean. You don't have the leverage here, Harrison. You have a choice." She tapped the screen again. A second document appeared. A standard boilerplate customs clearance contract. "You are going to sign a 5-year exclusivity waiver for our freight. 0 delays, 0 administrative fees. In exchange, I will ensure this ledger never finds its way to the desk of the Inspector General." Harrison looked from the ledger to the contract. He looked at Roman, silently begging the man in charge to step in. Roman didn't look at Harrison. He was looking at Maeve. A slow, dark smirk spread across his face, a look of profound, terrifying pride. "You heard the lady," Roman said softly. Harrison signed the contract with a shaking hand. He practically ran out of the boardroom the second the ink was dry. The heavy glass doors hissed shut, leaving Maeve and Roman alone in the room. Maeve exhaled, running a hand over her face. The adrenaline spike faded, leaving a comfortable, familiar hum of victory in its wake. She tapped the console, shutting down the projection. Roman stood up. He walked slowly around the edge of the table until he stood beside her chair. He didn't hover. He didn't loom. He leaned against the edge of the glass table, crossing his ankles. "You were a little rough on him," Roman noted, his grey eyes glinting with amusement. "He tried to treat me like a secretary," Maeve said, looking up at him. "He's an idiot." Roman reached out, his hand sliding smoothly around the back of her neck, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. The touch was grounding, warm, and unapologetically possessive. "You're the queen of the board." Maeve leaned into his touch. She thought about the terrified woman standing in a cheap cubicle, praying for the clock to hit 5 p.m. That woman was dead. Roman hadn't killed her. He had given Maeve the tools to bury her herself. "I'm just protecting our assets," Maeve murmured, pulling him down by his lapels for a slow, deep kiss that tasted of power and permanence. "Protect away, sweetheart," Roman whispered against her lips. "They're all yours." If you enjoyed this descent into the gritty, high-stakes world of Maeve and Roman, hit that like button and let us know in the comments below. Did Maeve handle that boardroom scene like a boss? Or what? Don't forget to share this story with your friends who crave dark, grounded romance with a ruthless edge. Make sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so you never miss out on our latest original audio dramas. Stay sharp, stay loyal, and we'll see you in the next one.